Alright, we're going to dive right into this next one. The first thing I did was set my floor pan in here and then trace around all the edges where I need to sand off the paint so I can weld. So I'm going to get out the grinder with the wire wheel, strip all the paint off all around, and do the same thing on the floor pan there. And then I'm going to spray it with some Steel It, and I'm going to start welding. So I sanded all the edges and painted it with the Steel It. So now I'm ready to start welding. I put this in here to weigh it down a little bit, and I clamped this side. And now I'm ready to start welding. Okay, so maybe you noticed in the time lapse I was bringing out the hammer and the punch a little bit. That's because as I'm welding, I'll stop and you'll see gaps like this. What have you done? Get out of here. I'll take a bite if you want to come around this side. Thank you. So as I'm welding, a little bit from the heat and a little bit because it's not a perfect fit, it's warping and making a gap. So I'll do a couple tacks, it'll start to gap, and then I'll hammer it and flatten it back up against there and do a couple more tacks. And then areas like this where it was too sharp to actually get a good swing of the hammer, I'm using the punch to get right on there and then tapping it down that way. I've got the floor pan welded in all the way around. Definitely not my best work, but passable. And now the next step is to get underneath and do the spot welds for the torque box that hold it to the floor, and then do the spot welds for this bracket that was down here that also hold up to the floor. Okay, so the rear pan is all welded in now. So my next step will be moving up front. I have to take a wire wheel all around where I marked where the new pan touches and clean that down to bare metal. And then I'm going to spray the Steel It on there. That way it keeps paint on it down here where it's going to be overlapping. Then I also have to take a wire wheel all around the floor pan edges so I can get a nice clean weld. I have to do that on both sides, and then I'll also hit that with the Steel It. Let's see a little camera magic. Amazing! Okay, so the floor pan and where it's going to touch in here on the tub, it's all sanded down and now painted with the Steel It. I'm just waiting for this to dry, and then I'm going to put it in there and I'm going to start welding in the front floor pan. Well, this is as far as I got today, and I think this is as far as I'm gonna get because I ran out of wire. And it's raining outside, and I don't feel like going out in the rain to get more wire. This is my life right now, guys. I come home from work, I order food, I live in the garage. This Jeep better love me. Still making progress on the welds. It's very slow and tedious and really kills my back being bent over for hours. And it's not like I'm an old guy with a bad back. I'm 30, right? It's killing me. Just being hunched in there all awkward. Alright, well, I just finished welding in the front floor pan. That was miserable, and it took a few days because I've been very busy the last couple of days and I haven't done anything. So, there she is. Now I gotta do the tacks up from underneath on the torque box. Alright, I just finished up doing the spot welds from the torque box to the floor pan. You can still see all the smoke coming out. And that was along here. And then on the other side, up attaching to the floorboard. You can see them all in here where it was burning through to the top, all the way up. So now that that's finally done, it's time to move on to making these patch panels here. I'm going to start with these inside panels here and back here. And once I get those in, I can put the roll cage in, line up the bolt holes, tack weld a couple nuts on the inside of this, and then I'll be able to mount the cage when I'm ready. And then I can put this section of the rocker over it. But I have to get that part in there and those bolts mounted first, otherwise I won't be able to weld them in. Alright guys, so it's probably been about a week since I've worked on the Jeep. It's been extremely hot and humid in Ohio, and I hate it. It's pretty much the devil. It's been in like the high 90s for both heat and humidity, and it's just felt horrible. So I've got this patch panel pretty close to shape. I need to get a little better rounding here on this bend, and to do that I'm going to use the horn of my anvil. And I had just been too lazy after working outside at work all day to come home and clean this section out and then work on the Jeep. But it's Saturday. I've been working 12 days straight now, so I guess I'll just go ahead and man up and get it done. So here we go. Okay, that's got it pretty close to where we need it, so I'll give you a quick look at it. So here's the new patch panel I made. It is roughly to shape. It's roughly got the bends in there. It's pretty close. So it's cut higher back here than it is down here. So I've got a lot more metal hanging over the old metal here. So I might grind it down some from here to over here, and then I'll be a little more flush with the new metal, and then just give it a slight rounding, kind of to hug it better, and then I can start welding it in and making minor adjustments as I go. And then here is the outside, what it looks like. So after I get this in, I'm going to need to make this back panel here, and once I get that in, I'll probably cut this section out and make a little panel for here. But we are getting pretty close to having all the patches and new metal welded in. So I kind of cut out the thin rusty metal here, and then I cut this new piece of sheet metal to roughly the length I need it, and I stuck this through here and got it roughly where I want it. I'll probably have to add another little patch on the inside, which is fine. And then I marked it with a line there so I know roughly where to bend. So I'm going to start making a bend until I get it flush up against this when it's pushed through there.
hate Ohio. I hate it.
With about, I don't know, 40 minutes to an hour's worth of hammering back and forth, I got that kind of kicked in right there. So I can weld that all up, kind of seal that in. And then got it kind of nice and rounded on this side where it meets up pretty decent. So push it up, it gets a pretty nice seal. There's a little gap in a couple spots like that, but once I get some tacks on here, I can hammer that in better and kind of shape it while it's on there. There's also a little gap on the bottom here. I think it's just because my floor pan, it's just kind of got a dip there from how it was tack welded to the brace or the torque box. So I'm gonna try and build weld up to that. Not a big deal, we'll see. It won't look good, but I mean, again, it's better than the big hole that was there. Same thing in this corner, there's a little gap there, and it's still kind of a little empty or a little rotted right there. So I'm gonna try and build the weld up and just kind of seal it up all in this corner. So those are my two patch panels. It'll look something like that. Now that I put this piece in there, I have to take a little bit off the back here. That way it'll sit flush again because the thickness of this metal is kind of kicking it out. So yeah, making progress. I'm still working on just fine-tuning the bends on this. Like I've spent the last few minutes kind of laying this lip over, so instead of it coming straight up past, it's kind of sitting flush on there. So yeah, not a whole lot to record during this. It's basically just me making a few hits, checking to make sure it's getting a good bend, and every bend you do kind of affects the rest of it, so then you got to go back and fix the issue that you caused by making the new bend. But it's almost there. I think that's pretty good. I might put a little more bend up in here and around here, but other than that, it's not too bad, because once I start tack welding, it'll hold it in place and I can bend it a little bit on here. Now I'm going to spray the Steelit on both the pieces I made on the back sides. That way anything that gets welded up against other metal, it'll still have a coat of paint back there. And the Steelit is a weldable spray paint, if you guys didn't know that. And then I'm going to wire wheel where it's going to be, where the pieces I made are going to be touching the floor pan. That way I can weld that too. I got the backs of both the pieces I made sprayed with the Steelit. And then I went ahead and cleared off the paint on all of this, and the section where there's going to be overlap that I won't be able to get to, I sprayed that with Steelit as well. So now the next thing to do is weld, but I'm going to do that tomorrow because it's already like 8 o'clock and I got to work at 5 in the morning. So one other thing I did in here was clean off a lot of the rust, or most of it that I could get to, and then spray it with the rust converting primer. This won't make this Jeep perfect, and I think I made it clear already. I'm going for, you know, like a 7 out of 10, a good enough. This is still going to be a trail Jeep. It's going to get beat up, so I'm not trying to go for a full restoration and clean every bit of rust off this thing and totally restore it. That would be almost impossible with this Jeep, and I don't have the time or tools to do that. So I'm just trying to repair the bad spots and prolong the life of some of the other spots. And yeah, I mean, there's only so much I can do with this, and it's gonna get beat up anyway. So here's one other thing I wanted to show you guys real quick. You've probably seen it in the background of this video from time to time, but these are my new tires I bought for phase 2 of my build here. These are 35-inch Mickey Thompson Baja Boss mud terrains. They are beautiful. And these are the new rims I bought as well. Altogether, for just 4 tires and 4 rims so far, I think it was about $2,500. So I am in deep on this TJ. This is just a drop in the bucket. Let me know what you guys think of the new rims and tires in the comments. So I've got these 2 patch panels welded in now, and I did a lot on both sides just to make it nice and strong. So my next step is going to be putting the roll cage in here, so I can make the holes in this panel and then mount the nuts on the other side so I can then actually attach the roll cage to it again. Here's a look at what I did on the inside. And here's a look at the back. I'll also have to make like a little patch for this little section of pan that's not there. I'm not sure why that piece of the floor pan isn't there. Maybe this originally was angled farther over to here, but my patch only goes to here, so I'll just have to make a small patch to fill that in.
The shoes for pushing.
Okay guys, so I did it off camera just because it was hard to do and would have been just not very flattering to film, but I put my roll cage back in here, and when I did that, I marked the 2 spots where the bolts go through the cage and mount up on the sidewall there. So I Sharpie marked them, and that one you'll see is perfectly round, so you want to get that one nice and centered. This one is more of an oval, so that's the one that can be kind of off, up or down or whatever. And yeah, so I'm going to center punch both of those, and then I'm going to drill them out to the size of my bolt. And after that, I have to tack weld 2 nuts onto a little metal rectangle that I'm going to cut out, and then I'm going to use that rectangle and that little sheet metal rectangle, and I'm going to weld all around it on the other side, making sure I get my bolt holes lined up with the nuts. Okay, so now that I've got it center punched where I'm going to drill, I'm going to use a smaller bit as a pilot hole. That way it keeps the bigger bit from drifting. So I'm going to drill these out first with this bit, and then the bolts I have are 3/8. So I'm going to start with a 3/8 bit. Here we go. Alright, so the bolts fit through. So the next thing is going to be to cut out a rectangular piece of metal that's about that big, just a little bit bigger than the actual space between the bolts. That way I can weld the nuts on, and then use that as a bracket to weld all around to hold the nuts there. And by welding it to that little metal bracket that I'm going to make first, that ensures that I can get the exact correct spacing between the bolts, and if I mess up, it's not attached in there and I don't have to try and cut anything off. So then I just have to line the bracket up, put the bolts through, hold the bracket down tight, and then just tack weld the bracket around, and it'll hold it in place and make sure everything's lined up right. So luckily I found a piece of scrap that's basically the perfect size. So I'm going to take it and hold it on the back. Now with it back there, I'm going to mark the holes on it. So there are the holes marked, so I have to drill those out as well. Okay, so this is my bracket, and I've got a nut just on the end of a bolt here with just a little bit of the bolt sticking through, so it can kind of hold it right there. So I'm going to hold on to the bolt to keep the nut in place while I tack weld it. That's one done. Now I'm going to move on to the other. So again, I'm just sticking the bolt through the nut, just a couple threads like that. And then that'll allow it to catch on that bolt. And I can hold it in place, holding the bolt and keeping my hand out of the way, so I can tack weld it on. so here's the bracket. Everything threads through fine. So the next step is, this is going to be the side that's welded right up against the wall. So I'm going to paint this side with Steel It to hopefully keep it from rusting. And then the same thing in the Jeep, where this will be right up against the wall. I'm going to paint the inside of that wall with the Steel It as well. Okay, so I've got everything painted. I've got the bracket held in there with the bolts. So now what I'm going to do is go in here and start to tack weld all around this bracket that I made so it can hold it in there. And then it doesn't have to be 100%. That's kind of why I made the bracket, because I can get, like, you know, this side done, a lot of tacks on the top. It'll be really hard to reach in the corner over here, but it won't matter because it'll still have a ton of tacks all the way around that bracket, which will hold it all together. All right, well, there's the bracket all welded in and painted up. So I guess the next step is gonna be to put a little bit of a patch here just to get rid of that gap, and then we're ready to actually cut out the rocker. So I'll go to my rocker patch panel and cut out this size, this length and shape, and then I can weld it in. Okay guys, so here is the piece of my rocker that I cut out, that I held on to, and I tried to do it in one big piece for this reason, because now I can just set it on here, match up the curves, and then draw a line, and that's right where I need to cut. Now I'll try and stay on the top side of the line just to give myself a little extra, and that I can grind off and make it more of a perfect fit. But yeah, so this should make it pretty easy if you hung on to this part and you're doing the same thing I'm doing. Okay, so here's a look at the section of rocker I cut out to patch this piece. It's not bad. I mean, pretty decent fit up. A little bit of gap up in here, but I should be able to fill that with weld, no problem. And it's a little off down here, but this is more of a gradual bend, and this is almost more of a 90-degree bend. So I'll either slightly bend this down or just tap this with a hammer to make it look a little more of a gradual transition, but either way, it's not a big deal. I think that'll look pretty decent. And once again, putting rock rails over this, so it's not going to be a big deal. It'll be covered. It'll have the rocker guard and then the sliders, so it should be pretty good. And then the next step that I skipped for a second was, this will be that little section down here that is opened up for whatever reason through the floor pan. So I kind of traced out the rough shape. The inner square is the actual gap of the opening, and the outer one is where I'm going to cut, so I have a little overlap to weld onto. And yeah, so I'm going to cut this out, and then I'll take this section of rocker off, weld this piece in, paint it, and then I'll paint the back of this rocker too, and then I'll be ready to weld the rocker in. So here's my super cool little square that I'm going to weld on. So there's the little patch all welded in. The only thing I'll probably still have to do is, once I put the rocker on here, I'll probably have to do a little weld right here, or just slather the bottom with seam sealer, or do both, because yeah, I'm crazy like that. Okay, so the inside of this has a nice coat of paint on it now, so I'm just gonna fit it up and start welding. Alright, so I welded it up, and then I went ahead and ground down the welds as much as I think I'll probably do. I don't want to get too thin on the metal, but a good thing about grounding down the welds is you can go back and you can see these little spots where the welds overlapped but didn't actually fill in. So I'm going to go back and add a couple more on those. This side actually turned out pretty decent. It's still not perfect. If you look at it down this way, there's kind of some divots here and there where the metal kind of got together and like pushed in because it, I don't know, it's hard to do body work. But again, not too concerned about that. I think I might go back and on this side and the passenger side, I might add some Bondo to fill that, just so it's not a spot that will hold water or mud after I put the rocker guards on there. I still have to do some plug welds from the bottom. This isn't, you can see it, well maybe you can, flexing. It needs to be plug welded to the floor pan and stuff on the inside. So I'll clamp it and then plug weld that to keep it a little more flush. Well, I slapped some paint on there to keep it from rusting. I've got the spot welds underneath holding it to the floor pan. So I think I'm pretty much done with this part. I still need to clean the feet up on the bottom of the roll cage and then paint that. And then I can put it back in and get my seats and seat belt back in there so I can get ready. I'll probably drive it up to the car wash and pressure wash this out, let it dry for a day or two, come back, do the seam sealer, rough it up a little bit with some sandpaper, and then do the Raptor liner. But yeah, I'm pretty close to being done here, so I'm pretty excited about that. Next thing I'm gonna do is take a wire wheel at all of this rust, and the new metal I put in there is rusting because I didn't paint it yet. So I'm gonna clean all that up, and then I'm gonna spray everything with the rust converting primer. Okay, well, this Jeep is filthy and I'm gonna hose it down inside and out. I'm trying to get everything out. I'm gonna make it more dirty again tomorrow when I lightly sand everything to prep for the Raptor liner, but yeah, it's just real bad. So I need to clean it up and see what needs fixed here and there. There are a couple things I want to add a couple welds to. Like there's a spot in here before I had gas where it was just burning through a lot. And then this little spot back here, I may try and put a little weld in there, or I might just seam seal it. The gas tank's right down there, so I am in fact a little hesitant to weld and drop sparks right on my gas tank. Well, it's all hosed down, dripping wet. Hopefully I didn't mess any of the electronics up. I didn't try to be too safe. I sprayed basically everything except for the very top of the dash, and I even did a little bit of the top of the dash over there. Yeah, I don't know. I figure people get caught in the rain all the time and they survive. And I put in marine rated speakers. The stereo I barely sprayed. It should be okay. I think I'll start cleaning up tonight. I might just real quick hit the bottom of those feet, but I did the tops. And I wire wheeled everything I could get to pretty good. Obviously back in this section it's almost impossible to get into, so I just got out what I could. The big flaky stuff I scraped off with a screwdriver down in here, and then I sprayed it with the rust converter. I did the same thing on this side. All in all, I think it'll be good. Obviously it's never going to be perfect, not with me doing it, but if you're watching these videos, then I'm willing to bet you're not here to spend $1 million to have a professional do it, and you're also not too worried about it being absolutely perfect. So yeah, thanks for tuning in, guys. I will see you tomorrow.